CEO and co-founder of Tweetminster and something of a specialist of Italian politics. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening. First of all, at the end of this extraordinary 72-hour period, we see probably, if these negotiations with the Italian president go as people expect them to go, Italy will get its youngest prime minister, Matteo Renzi, a man who's promised to come in on a wave of change. He wants to change the old way of doing things, and yet seems to have come in the most Italian of ways possible.
Absolutely. I think that will be Renzi's first big challenge, will be being able to find a balance between the promises that he made in the past and the fact that he promised to scrap the establishment, and then he's made a deal with the establishment within his party to out Mr. Letta, and now he's about to take power in a way which we've seen in the past in Italy.
And indeed, it is a question of a party voting against the government it leads. This, from the outside, seems quite extraordinary.
It does, and it is a very original event, even within the context of Italian politics. The Democratic Party has had conflicts in the past, but usually governments fail when coalition partners pulled out, not when a prime minister was voted out by his own. So it is quite extraordinary, even within the context of Italy.
And yet, the markets have reacted relatively calmly. They seem to have taken the news with little fluster. There is a sense that perhaps this incoming prime minister, if indeed he proves to be the new man to take over, Matteo Renzi, is something of a reformer, and perhaps the man seen by the markets at least to carry out the sorts of reforms that Italy needs.
Absolutely. I think beyond the way Renzi took power, if you look at his analysis of the government and the fact that the government was stuck in a swamp and wasn't able to fulfill the reforms that the country really needs, Renzi's analysis is impeccable. The big question, though, remains if his energy alone will be able to make these reforms happen, because one thing Renzi won't be able to change is the parties with which he governs and the members of parliament which have to vote those reforms.
Indeed, is there any guarantee even that he'll be able to cobble together the coalition that he needs?
I think he will definitely become the next prime minister, bar incredible surprises, and he will quite comfortably win a confidence vote next week. The challenge will be after that, if he will be able to bring forward the reforms that he wants to bring forward. I think one rather likely scenario is that instead of being able to govern until 2018, which is what he mentioned yesterday, he will be able, with the support of Silvio Berlusconi's Forza Italia party, which isn't even in the coalition, to pass an electoral reform, and then we return to the polls next year. I think that is right now the most likely scenario.
In the meantime, this is a man who will not have the benefit of electoral legitimacy. The Italian public have not voted for him, and he will have to lead reforms that will be unpalatable and difficult to get through.
Yes, I think it's, on the one hand, I think it's important to point out that in Italy, voters don't directly elect the prime minister. They elect members of parliament, then the president mandates someone to form a government on the back of a parliamentary majority. At the same time, though, it is indeed a matter of fact that since 1992, Renzi will become the 9th prime minister. Of these, only 2 will have actually won elections. And I think from the point of view of how the public perceive that, that will be yet another challenge that Renzi will have to face. So being able to convince voters, let alone once he's in government, but once he returns to the polls, that he is someone who they can elect.
It will be one of his big challenges, will it not? This fractured nature of Italian politics today. What happened at the last elections, a rejection by many Italians of what seemed to be the system itself, and an inability to choose one credible politician who might, or party who might lead the country definitively out of its troubles. It is the problem for countries that have had almost a suspension of democracy, where technocrats have been put in charge, where the crisis has meant that, in a sense, democracy was put on hold, that when it comes back, it seems all the more fractured than ever it was before.
Absolutely. And I think from Renzi's point of view, his challenge will be that between now and the next election, the main opposition party, so Forza Italia and the Five Star Movement, every day will remind voters that he wasn't elected. And the last person they did that to, of course, was Mario Monti, and his party is now polling on around 1%. So Renzi will find it very hard and will have to put forward the reforms, and people will need to see change within the country, and that lots of that will be out of his control for them to forgive him when the election comes. I think on the second point, the Italian political system, I think, has been worsened by the current crisis, but goes well beyond the current crisis. If we look at the past 20 years, one of Silvio Berlusconi's strengths, for example, has always been the weakness of the alternatives. Whenever a centre-left government went into power, it would fall relatively quickly because coalition partners would start to fight, and he's always been able to exploit that weakness. The crisis has made that underlying problem much, much worse, and we've seen the emergence of the Five Star Movement within that void.
Finally, the crucial thing, no doubt, from the point of view of the markets and the country's economy will be the continuation of this privatization drive that the Italian government has been on. Will Matteo Renzi be the man to push it through to the end? Can he fix the Italian economy, which, after all, is what needs fixing first of all?
I think in terms of economic reforms, most of the reforms that we will see from Renzi's government will be relatively similar to those that we were seeing from Letta. One element there will be if he will be able to convince MPs to then vote these reforms through and the packages that the government proposes. I think the main difference will be less in terms of economic reforms, it will be more in terms of institutional and electoral reforms, and to create the foundations ahead of the next election to have a more stable government after the country returns to the vote.
Alberto Nardelli, thank you for being with us on that extraordinary few days, even in the context of Italian politics. Thank you very much indeed for having been with us today. It is 26 minutes past 6 here in Paris. You're watching live from Paris. We're going to take a quick break. In just a few minutes, I'll be back with all the very latest headlines. We'll have a look also at the latest in business. We'll be hearing from Marcus Carlson about the latest business news, and we will also be getting the very latest in sports. That's all coming up.